Good afternoon to you. 506 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. You can join us, 888-630-9625, 888-630 WMAL. Over on CNN, Axios reporter Alex Thompson says, it's not just Joe Biden who's a liar. It's also Kamala Harris.
Kamala Harris is the clear frontrunner, and it's not clear who, if anybody, would actually challenge her for the nomination. But the thing is that she, we talked about credibility. She's going to have to, first of all, answer the fact that she's been one of the main public validators of his health. You remember after the Her report, she went out there and said he is with it. He is commanding everything in the room. She's going to have to sit down and answer tough questions.
Yeah, remember Kamala Harris saying that?
What I saw of that report last night, I believe is, as a former prosecutor, the comments that were made by that prosecutor, gratuitous, inaccurate, and inappropriate.
Inaccurate. He was wrong, that Robert Hur. Boy, they just keep on lying. Joining us now to discuss that topic, Josh Hammer. He's a senior editor at large of NewsWeek, a syndicated host of the Josh Hammer Show, and he joins us on the phone. Josh, good to talk to you today, sir.
Vince, I appreciate it. Good afternoon to you.
It's wild. The lying here is as pronounced as it's ever been in American politics. The disinformation campaign that they've been waging, and I don't really feel like the media coverage of this really is commensurate to the dishonesty that we're experiencing right now.
Well, there's a reason for that, Vince, which is that if the media coverage were to be commensurate to the dishonesty, the media would have to own up to the fact that they only have themselves to blame for this, because they have been deeply complicit in what I called in my column this morning the single greatest lie, the single greatest extensive gaslighting operation in the entire history of the American Republic.
Yeah.
For years and years, those of us on the right, frankly, a lot of people in the middle, every so often actually even an intellectually honest person on the center left would go out and say, this is not okay. I mean, we can clearly see that the commander-in-chief, the guy who ostensibly has control of the nuclear football, we can clearly see with our own eyes and ears that this man is losing it. I mean, we saw when he fell off of a stationary bicycle in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware in 2022. When he fell on stage at the Air Force Academy graduation in Colorado Springs, when they swapped out his dress shoes for those funny-looking tennis sneakers with the extra 3 to 4 inch cushion. I mean, I could go on and on here. The point is, every single time one of us pointed that out, they dismissed us as deplorable MAGA right-wing kooks who were not worth taking seriously. And literally on a snap of the fingers, after that epic meltdown in Atlanta, Georgia, in the Jake Tapper, Dana Bash moderated CNN debate, with a snap of the fingers, they turned 180 degrees. And unless I've missed it, and I don't think I have not seen anything remotely resembling a sense of self-awareness, any kind of acknowledgement that they have flipped on a dime like this. They basically just pulled a complete 180 and thought that we would forget about it. But we obviously haven't forgotten about it. As recently as 2 to 3 weeks ago, they were dismissing our concerns about the commander-in-chief wandering off with Giorgia Meloni in Italy, about him wandering off with Emmanuel Macron at the D-Day ceremony in Normandy, about him staring off stage there with Barack Obama in Los Angeles. And the New York Times and the Biden administration said that these were, quote, misleading. They were cheap fakes. And they expect us to just memory hold what they were saying as recently as a few weeks ago. So the whole thing just stinks to high heaven. I don't really know how else to say it.
Yeah.
But whatever contempt you might have for the media, I would suggest to you that is not enough contempt, because they deserve nothing but your visceral disgust at this point.
There was a piece earlier this week published in CNN by a media reporter there called Hadass Gold, and she says that White House reporters told her that the reason they refused to cover this with any intensity was because they were pressured out of covering it by the White House, including by the White House claiming that this was a right-wing talking point. The right-wing media was calling him senile from day one, and that wasn't true, said a White House reporter. Then whenever you report on the age, you were in some ways solidifying, giving credence to some people that were actually of bad faith. All of the White House reporters who spoke to CNN for this piece chose to do it anonymously. A source familiar with the staff behind the Wall Street Journal's report, the one that pointed out how failing Biden is a couple weeks ago, said that when they first published the piece, the reporters were approached by people with sympathy, asking them how they're doing, quote, as if something terrible had just happened. After the debate, the reporters started to get messages saying they were right. Isn't it amazing that, so the right here, meaning conservatives, have been, as you point out, telling the truth about this, and because of that, it was off limits.
Yeah, that's exactly right, what you just laid out. You know, the Wall Street Journal story, which came out about a month ago now, it was in early June, that should have been an eyes wide open moment at the very latest. Obviously, as I indicated earlier, many of us had our eyes wide open years ago. I mean, I was actually reviewing some of my previous writings on the topic. I had a column from July 2022 where I said that, quote, there is something very, very clearly wrong with the president. So some of us have been touting this or shouting this, I should say, for quite literally years now. But at the very latest, if you were somehow naive, if you somehow had your blinkers on,
yeah,
that Wall Street Journal article should have been the absolute latest warning sign because, as I think you just implied, there were a number of Democrats who went on record there in that Wall Street Journal article to basically say that they withdrew their previous instinctive criticisms or concerns as to what they saw with Joe Biden after the White House reached out. I mean, when you have Democrats who are essentially admitting to a major paper like the Journal that the White House is telling them to change their tune or else, ... I mean, who knows what kind of retribution they might take. That is a bombshell story. And
yeah,
as usual, only conservatives were paying attention to it. But
only
at the very latest, Vince, that should have been, I think, a major alarm.
And, you know, and remember back to the 2020 primary. This was actually a feature of the Democrat primary in 2020. This realization, this admission that Biden has had a failing mind. I remember at one point during that primary, Cory Booker was willing to say things like this in his media interviews. Of course, there was this infamous moment as Julian Castro mentioned it on a debate stage. Listen to this.
They do not have to buy in.
You just said that. You just said that 2 minutes ago. You just said 2 minutes ago that they would have to buy in. You said they would have to buy in.
Have to buy in. If she qualifies for Medicaid,
are you forgetting what you said 2 minutes ago?
Be in for it.
Are you forgetting already what you said just 2 minutes ago?
The reaction there from the audience tells you the whole story. The only reason they're reacting in shock, like it's a wrestling match, is because someone on that stage dared to say that the emperor has no clothes, Josh Hammer.
Yes, that's exactly right. And again, it's just farcical that the dam broke all of a sudden and in the manner that it did. I mean, do you know what it reminds me of, frankly? It reminds me of the old Italian mafia, the old La Cosa Nostra doctrine of omerta, where you would kind of take a vow of silence, like a solemn vow to not rat anyone out. You know, if the law enforcement comes, police come, FBI, you name it, you'll stay silent, you'll serve your time in jail. You will never rat anyone out. I mean, it seems to me like the left-wing press for the past few years, up until, I don't know, approximately seven and a half days ago, that debate, they had a collective vow of omerta. And every so often, when you have someone like the clip that we just heard, who would get out there and say the obvious truth, the media would all gang up and say, what are you talking about? Why are you feeding this right-wing MAGA deplorable kook crazy talking point there? But thus far, the dam has started to break, but it has not fully broken. And that is kind of the most interesting thing to me, Vince. I kind of thought that over the weeks that followed the debate, because we're now 8 days after the debate, I actually thought that we would see even more unanimity from the ranks of the Democratic rank and file that this man has to drop out. We've only seen a couple of congressmen break ranks so far. The governors put on a show of support at the White House there 2 nights ago on Wednesday evening, just before the holiday. So, I mean, it's something of a Mexican standoff at this point, and I'm increasingly inclined to think that Joe Biden's actually not going anywhere, which is pretty wild.
And the other piece here is that the media did not just start telling the truth all of a sudden because they realized they had journalistic obligations, Josh Hammer. This was filtered through the lens merely of Democrat Party politics entirely, which is this guy is not the best to beat Trump, so let's replace him now, and we have to emphasize his liabilities.
Yeah, 100%. And, you know, the Democrats obviously only had themselves to blame for this mess that they have put themselves in. It was the Democratic Party's commissars who who disincentivize anyone from mounting a serious primary challenge to Joe Biden. Dean Phillips was the only one who mounted anything remotely resembling a challenge. It was not a particularly well-funded one. It was not a particularly discussed one. The media pretended like it never existed, essentially, there. They could have easily, in retrospect, gone a different direction. The Democratic Party could have very easily encouraged a more robust primary process. They could have encouraged Gavin Newsom and Gretchen Whitmer, Kathy Hochul, God help us, Michelle Obama. I mean, they could have encouraged whoever they wanted to get in. They didn't do that because the operation consistently from the day this man got in office in January 2021 until approximately last Thursday evening around 10:30 to 10:45 p.m., the name of the operation was just protect the precious at all costs, protect the president at all costs.
Yeah.
Now they're freaking out, and the most disgusting part of this all, Vince, to me at least, is the fact that this cover-up has all been done, what else, but in the name of our democracy. That is literally how they have justified to themselves this cover-up, because they have deluded themselves into thinking that the opposition, the nefarious orange man, Donald Trump, is somehow a unique threat to democracy, and therefore shielding the people from the reality of their commander-in-chief is somehow serving lowercase d democratic purposes. It is just one of the most sick, cynical things I've ever encountered in my life, I think.
Yeah, and it's a part of a long litany of lies that the left has told to the country and certainly to their own base. I mean, talk about the abuse that they met out on Democrats. Biden was ushered into the nomination by promising that he was a, quote, transition candidate, that he merely existed to branch the old to the younger generation, clearly telling voters that his plan was really only as a one-term gig. That's not the case here. As Biden holds on desperately, as Jill Biden holds on desperately, Hunter Biden holds on desperately, they've lied nonstop to their base about any number of issues.
Indeed, they have. And at this point, at a bare minimum, the voters have to be very clear. If you're a voter who's somehow on the fence, you should be very clear that even if Joe Biden stays in this race, that you are essentially voting for a Kamala Harris presidency. I mean, at this point, there are really no ifs, ands, or buts around that. In fact, it would not shock me if, God help us, I mean, if Joe Biden actually stays in this race and if he somehow actually wins the presidency, which I do not see happening, but let's just kind of play this out hypothetically. If that were to happen, I can very, very easily see a world in which he resigns within the first 2 to 3 weeks of taking office. So if you actually vote for Joe Biden at this point, if he does not withdraw and you vote for him, you are absolutely voting for a Kamala Harris presidency. And I think people should be very clear-eyed going into the choice this November that is actually what you are, in fact, voting for. But again, as I said, Vince, I don't actually think that they can probably remove Joe Biden despite all these shrieks of hysteria. I actually interviewed the FEC commissioner, Trey Traynor, a Republican-nominated Federal Election Commission commissioner. I actually interviewed Commissioner Traynor on my own show, the Josh Hammer Show, this week, and he essentially agreed with that assessment. He basically saw the current campaign finance and election law obstacles as something very closely approximating full-on insurmountable.
Yes.
So I'm just not sure that they can do it. And that makes the media's initial freak out in those 24 hours after the debate all the more curious, because come September and October, you're going to start seeing nonstop ads from the Trump campaign with like Van Jones basically crying on CNN saying, I love Joe Biden, but he's got to drop out, man. So, particularly short-sighted as well in hindsight.
Yeah, well, it's kind of the habit of their party, too. It's like the Democrat Party is very routinely only short-term thinkers about what can they do at this moment for political expedience. If you don't have long-term thinking on this subject, you're going to run into a bunch of deadlines that you can't overcome. So that's what's happening as we speak, and we'll see what happens next. Josh Hammer, thank you very much. Excellent reporting, insights, and time on the show today. Thank you, sir. Good to talk to you. All the way across the country is where we find the city of Los Angeles, and that's where Sid is calling from, line 6. Sid, you're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hi there.
Hey there.
How are you?
I'm good, Sid. What's on your mind?
I'm telling you, I think we're paying too much attention to President Biden's mental infirmity. I know Democrats who would have him demented and still be president because they like his policies. They don't care if he's demented. The only reason that it's out now is because it's news. We've known this for months. They knew it back in 2000 that he didn't have 2020. They didn't have the mental capacity.
Right.
I think we should be focusing on his policies and not his dementia or whatever, because if he runs, he's going to run on these policies that he feels are so wonderful that he's implemented, even though, let's say, completely demented. He was able to. I think he's a great politician. He's implemented a lot of things that on his, not my agenda, but on his agenda. He's managed to implement a lot of chaotic things from his point of view.
Lots of chaos.
My friends who are Democrats don't care about the dementia, so they like his policies.
Yeah, that's one of the most critical things you could possibly do, which is talk about the policies. Because if they are successful, Sid, in replacing the guy, being reliant on his dementia as a campaign strategy is not going to work, is it?
No, I don't think so.
No, it'll be policy based. And the reality, you look at the polling. I mean, you're totally right about the polling here is the people, up until the debate, this has just made things worse for Biden. But up until debate, the reason Biden was losing among the American people was policy reasons. It was the economy. It's the state of our border.
Right. I think that's what the Republicans should be focused. They may start off the speech, I'm not going to comment on his dementia, and then talk about his policy.
Yeah.
Just sort of allude to it.
Yeah.
Really focus on it.
Yeah, we can't ignore the dementia story, though, because here's one of the reasons it's really important, is because it reveals to people who didn't otherwise know, for whatever reason, that there are a lot of people who are dedicated to lying to you, and they will do anything they can to hold on to power, including trying to pull the wool over your eyes about one of the things that's the most obvious thing that either you or I could possibly see, Sid, which is that the president of the United States doesn't have the mental faculties to barely function. All right, coming up, got some more details for you on what the left is up to this week, some economic numbers. Also, Sanjay Gupta has a plan for Biden over at CNN. I'll share that with you and so much more on the Vince Coglianese Show. Hey, good afternoon. 5:35 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. You can join us, 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Do you remember Mr. Potato Head? No, not the lovable children's toy. The guy who worked for CNN as their media guy, Brian Stelter is his name. Now he doesn't work at CNN because they fired him. They fired Brian Stelter. But now he appears on CNN all the time for free. What? But how little self-worth do you have to have? You get fired by the company, and then you keep giving them your services without taking any money. What's happening? All right, so anyway, CNN's Jim Sciutto, who still is employed by that network, interviewing Brian Stelter this week about what's going on, all this chaos on the left. And Brian Stelter was trying to find some silver lining here to emphasize that actually what this chaos around Biden, pay no attention to the fact that they've been lying to you, the conspiracy to keep this information from you, despite the fact that it was crystal clear to anybody who watched Joe Biden walk up and down the short stairs on Air Force One. Pay no attention to all of this lying. This proves that the Democrats are the good party. They're the decent party.
I think before the last week, voters were ahead of the media on this. What I mean is that voters had already decided, most voters, that Biden was too old to be president for 4 more years. But now the elite media is ahead of the Democratic base. The elite media, like The Economist, calling on Biden to resign. All this talk about a Kamala Harris presidency. Look, Jim, we may be in a world where we're going to have the first female president in the United States in a matter of weeks. That is not impossible. It seemed crazy maybe a couple of weeks ago before the debate. But we are now in an environment where there are a lot of possibilities. And I think that points to the asymmetry of these two parties, the Democrats and the Republicans. The Republicans are backing their convicted felon candidate to the hilt. Democrats are having a very active conversation about throwing their guy overboard. These two parties are so different. They're not.
Because you see, it's the right that's closed-minded and cultish. It's the left that's open-minded and wise. Maybe Biden, we should just get rid of him. After the primary is already concluded, after all these votes have been tabulated, the Democrat voters, to the extent that they were given any choices whatsoever in this world where they were forced to vote for Biden so long as they were showing up to the polls, that party, they're just, it's good to see how thoughtful they are, They're willing to do anything for the good of our country. But the right, can you believe they're supporting a convicted felon? Just the sheer amount of evil or stupidity or both that you have to have in order to advance a talking point like this. As it's Biden, or at the very least the people around him who do have functioning brains, who made the decision to target Trump and to hurt him and his voters, by the way, and people who work for Trump. You can, hopefully Steve Bannon can hear our voice from inside of a jail cell. These guys, Peter Navarro, January 6 defendants, pro-lifers, all sorts of people being attacked all across the country for their politics because they voted for Trump, because they didn't support the left, being crushed by their tyrannical behavior. And Brian Stelter, for free, is going on CNN and saying, it's a real asymmetry between these parties. There sure is, but it is not what you're describing. Once again, it's the opposite of what you're saying.
There's an asymmetry here, and you're seeing that in the media coverage as well, where liberal-leaning outlets are pressing for Biden to go because they believe that's the way to stop Trump. At the end of the day, this entire conversation about Biden is actually a conversation about Donald Trump.
True. And you did not have a similar conversation in right-wing media or at least publicly from Republican lawmakers following Donald Trump's criminal convictions right here in New York,
because it's a
which, of course, raised its own questions.
Yeah, it raises its own questions like, why are you idiots still employed? Or, well, why is one of you idiots still employed? The other one not. The other one doesn't work for CNN. And yet he's still going on their air. Speaking of CNN, Dr. Sanjay Gupta, he said that after that debate, maybe it is time, like Nancy Pelosi said, for Biden to have his brain tested.
But after the debate, I got a lot of calls, texts, emails from my neurology and brain science colleagues from around the world, frankly, sort of highlighting some of these things. But if you take a look, slow response time, I think we saw that, sort of in a sustained fashion.
It's not new. This is not a new deal. Wait, what, did you miss it the rest of the time? His entire presidency? His candidacy?
Definitive word retrieval mix-ups, rambling, sometimes confused speech, reduced voice volume as well, and reduced facial movements. And these things can all be connected. We often think of cognition simply being memory, but if someone has an underlying movement disorder, for example, that can actually affect cognition in the sense that people may have more flattened affect, face, and not really be speaking as quickly or as loudly. Now, if he were my patient, if he were my dad, frankly, I would want to get more testing done. Cognitive testing and more detailed movement disorder testing as well.
Gosh, isn't it great that he's pretending that all of these symptoms just arrived? It's like, it's real crazy. It just, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, he has, and then he uses all these technical terms to describe what he's seeing. What did Jon Stewart call Biden's face? Resting 25th Amendment face, he said. Those were the portions where Biden wasn't speaking. He was just looking bewildered as Trump was using his time effectively. Gavin Newsom is one of the loyal Democrat governor. He's not loyal. Sorry, let me change that. One of the guys who's pretending to be loyal. Meanwhile, measuring the drapes at the White House, trying to figure out how he can get in there. Gavin Newsom says that this chatter about how Biden only has a couple of hours a day where he's even awake and semi-coherent, it's not literal. It's just figurative.
So it wasn't a literal at 8 o'clock I will be doing things differently. It was more figurative.
Governor, just on that point,
Biden apparently told the governors that, I've been working too hard. I probably shouldn't keep those late nights anymore, said Joe Biden. The guy who only works until 4 o'clock to the extent that he works at all. He spends 40% of his presidency on vacation. I've been working too hard. He tells the governors, if I cut back a little bit, if I work a little bit less, if I merely trim my hours a little more, this presidency is going to go great. Gavin Newsom explaining what he heard.
Things differently. It was more figurative.
Governor Newsom, just on that point, that's an acknowledgement by President Biden that he does indeed feel fatigued and that stamina could be an issue.
Well, my God, I feel fatigue. I mean, he says without defense or pretense. I mean, we all do.
Yeah. You know how many hours it takes a day for me to do this hair? It is a long process. By the end of it, I practically feel fatigued. I'm getting cramps in my arms from putting all that grease on. Karine Jean-Pierre had this to say as she gaggled with reporters. They were all standing around gaggling, and she talked about Biden and whether or not he can do anything after 8.
Going forward, if there's going to be a change to where he can't do things after 8 o'clock, we're not talking about the last 3 years. We're talking about potentially the next 4 years.
Was it during the Hillary Clinton campaign, the stuff about like who's going to answer the 3 a.m. phone call, who can handle the middle of the night crisis? Right now, we're negotiating with whether or not Biden can do anything after 8 o'clock.
We're not talking about the last 3 years. We're talking about potentially the next 4 years.
Look, here's what I say, Annie. You have seen the president, even in the past week. You've seen him at 2 o'clock in the morning on the tarmac, greeting voters and Americans, engaging with them right when we landed in North Carolina. You saw him do, and that was 2 o'clock in the morning. You saw him speak in the evening in New York City when he spoke at an event.
Sure, and he just told the governors maybe I shouldn't do so many of those things because it turns out it's making me completely incoherent. Corinne also says that Joe Biden is definitely up to the job of doing this every single day of the year.
He is human, just like we all are. But it is a 24/7 job. It is 365 days a week. That doesn't change. That doesn't change.
Wait a second. I'm sorry. Did I say a year? She meant a week. She said 365 days a week.
Job. It is 365 days a week. That doesn't change. That doesn't change.
Can we get Corinne a cognitive test? I love, everyone's talking about Biden. I think Kamala needs a cognitive test. Karine Jean-Pierre needs a cognitive test. Janet Yellen needs a cognitive test. Why don't we throw Pete Buttigieg in there, too? Get him a cognitive test. Everyone tells us he's so brilliant. All right, prove it. Take a cognitive test. So the defenses continue here. Let's see. Let's go to line 1. I've got Omi calling in from Woodbridge, Virginia now. Omi, you're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Mr. Coglianese, how you doing, sir? I'm a big fan of yours. I'm on 95 traffic. My apologies.
Well, good luck in traffic. Thanks for calling, sir.
Thank you for having me. One of the things that we're no longer talking about Tim Scott, which I think is an absolutely hard selection for VP. But I'm looking at Byron Donalds because of the black vote, but I'm also looking at Marco Rubio because, one, he's fluent in Spanish. And if there's one thing as a Latino I see is that there's a lack of understanding about our civics, American constitutional, just general comprehension. Mm-hmm. And I think that a place like New Jersey would easily flip if they could have someone like Marco Rubio convey that message of that Republican ethic and Republican values. So that's all I wanted to say, sir.
So you like Marco Rubio as a running mate. You, of course, have noticed that President Trump is set to pick a running mate soon. We have the convention coming up later this month for the Republicans. But he has not yet made that announcement. And it seems pretty obvious why. This is a very bad news cycle for Joe Biden. And the last thing President Trump wants to do is interject with creating another news cycle that distracts everybody from that. But you think Marco Rubio's the best, and you said you don't like Tim Scott for the role. What gives you hesitancy or dislike about Tim Scott?
I saw Byron Donalds on the Stephen A. Smith podcast, and as it relates to like the 3/5 clause, Byron Donalds had a really refined and polished answer, and Stephen A. Smith is a staunch interviewer. He's got that really New York loudmouth, which, unfortunately I'm recovering from. But Byron Donalds had a great answer. But more importantly, I think Byron Donalds would appeal to, you got 20 million black voters, 25 million. Mm-hmm. The Latino population, legal is 60 million, and then the illegal is about 20 million. No one purchases a homes until this administration were Latinos. Number one business enthusiasts or for small business advocacy were Latinos. So if you can get a little bit edgewise in that direction, because they're already migrating to the Republican side just from a relating to the not being able to relate to the nonsense of the Democrat side. So imagine if you could just pull them over with better messaging.
But the goal, you mentioned, I think you used some numbers, you referenced legal and illegal aliens in the United States. The goal is to prevent illegals from voting in our elections.
I agree. I agree. But in our lifetime, we've seen how both parties have been using, amnesty.
Amnesty.
You know? So if indeed that occurs again, we at least have a foundation of Latinos that are going to understand what the Constitution is.
There's another piece here, though.
Rights.
There's another piece here in your theory that's worth pointing out, is that the tens of millions of people who've come into the country are by and large not actually Hispanic or Latino. A lot of the people who are coming in nowadays are from literally all over the planet, and it's just complete chaos. But you're right. There is an appetite. There has been historically from both the left and the right, including back in 1986, to have amnesties for the people who are already here. And when Reagan did that in 86, it was under the belief that the left would uphold its end of the bargain, which is to secure our border, to prevent it from ever happening again. Right. And how did that work out, Omi?
Well, I mean, you know, the Cubans that came over in the 80s, you also had a plethora of Afghanis that came over in the 80s, El Salvadorians that came over in the 80s, but they all, and the Vietnamese that came over in the 70s. Just take a trip down 95 in Vietnam. You'll see where they all took residence between, you know, the Springfield, et cetera, et cetera. But these people, that generation, they believed in the American dream. Latinos believe in the American dream. It just seems like no one's actually, I'm not saying cater to them, but reach out and try to at least send them the message in the language that can resonate best with them.
So one other piece, and I appreciate the call, and so you like Marco Rubio, and you point out that, you know, he's Spanish speaking, and so he maybe can appeal to Hispanic voters in a unique way. And I got all that, but there's
foreign policy as well.
Okay, but here's the thing. Here's one thing that I'm hoping that America can graduate from, and rapidly. This idea that you have to pick someone who looks like a voter in order to get that voter's support. It's a pernicious idea, and one that doesn't actually focus on ideas, but instead on one of the most shallow possible things, a skin color or like a specific cultural identity. And look what's happening here right now, Omi. Omi, I'll let you respond. I just want to say one thing, which is look what Trump is doing with Hispanic voters. Right now, President Trump has succeeded in turning the Hispanic demographic broadly. And as you know, Hispanic is really a catch-all for a very diverse group of people in terms of attitudes and politics. It's now a coin toss. If you consider yourself, quote, Latino, it's a 50-50 shot whether or not you're voting for the Democrat or the Republican. And Trump's not even trying to pretend he speaks Spanish. He was on Cinco de Mayo. He was tweeting out pictures of taco bowls from Trump Tower. He's kind of making a joke of it, but he's winning big with so many Hispanic voters.
I get where you're coming from. One of the things that resonates with me that Trump mentioned the other day was, we can't leave this up to the polls. We have to win, and win by a landslide. This is a recipe for a landslide because Latinos are so loyal. Once you appease them to their sensibilities, you got them for life. It's kind of like, remember the fiasco with the Goya brand?
Yes, I do.
So that right there just demonstrates, like, look, reach out to them. You don't have to give them shit. Oh, I'm sorry. You don't have to give them anything. But you do have to make some type of concession to say, look, we do understand that many of you maybe don't speak the language, but this is what is at stake. Because this fallacy that it's about democracy, many of them escape
socialism,
fascist countries or communist countries or socialist countries. They know that that's a ruse for verbiage that's being manipulated.
Yeah, for sure. Omi, thank you for the call. Good conversation. Really appreciate it. And thanks for listening, sir.
Thank you.
Good. Yeah, the boys were out on the boat this weekend on the Potomac, but the weekend, on July 4th, the Independence Day, yesterday. They were out floating in the water. They went and saw the fireworks at the Lincoln Memorial. Pretty cool. Good group of conservatives. Among them was Bradley Devlin, the political editor for the American Conservative, and he does a fantastic Trump impression. They were out floating by the wharf, and he got on the microphone, and they blasted a speaker in the direction of all the lefties standing at the wharf in D.C.
Wow.
What a beautiful day at the Wharf. It's so beautiful here. Good to see everybody out here. I don't think the Wharf's going to vote for me, frankly. They won't be voting for me, but they're going to be having a beautiful 4th of July, enjoying country music and a lot of good food out here at the Wharf. But don't worry, I'll be back. I'll be back in January 2025. I'll be back. And we're going to go to Shake Shack, and I'm going to buy everybody a free custard. Custard. They don't tell you enough, but the custard is the way to go, frankly. Because the milkshake, it gets too runny in this D.C. humidity. Trust me, I know it well. I'm from New York State, okay? But frankly, what we're going to do is we're going to have a great time. We're going to have a good 4th of July. We're going to save democracy. We're going to have so much fun. It's great to see all you beautiful people here. And frankly, when I win in November, we're going to save democracy, okay? No one saved democracy like I've saved democracy.
Nobody has. Nobody has. Not like that version of Trump. Bradley Devlin doing a great job. Have a great weekend. The great one up next.